You know, the most wonderful tales about moral and spiritual life, I suppose, would be gathered together by Sister Nivedita in the Cradle Tales of Hinduism. Now, her style of writing is more, kind of Victorian style, but so I'll be deriving many of the stories from her Cradle Tales. One of the, or two of the tales are really centered around what she calls the Krishna cycle, because there are many stories around Krishna. And the ideal of Krishna, of course, makes Krishna very beloved. I can just imagine Krishna there with one leg crossed, bent, and with a flute in the hand. And many devotional songs are written. One devotional song would be, you see, the flute is called Bansuri. It's a kind of wooden flute. So, may I be your flute so that you may blow on me with your sacred lips, that kind of thing, that kind of sentiment would be there. So it evokes a lot of devotion. But there are two stories about devotees which are inspiring to the young people. One is the story of, I'm trying to find it here, one is the story of Prasad, and the other one is to do with Dhruva. I might select the one to do with Dhruva first. I think it's page 247, if my memory serves me correctly. So let us see. Yes, 247. Now, of course, you know that there is the pole star, and whenever anybody wants to navigate internationally, they will use the pole star because it's the one fixed thing in the sky that never seems to move. So Dhruva is the name of the pole star. And actually the word Dhruva means the one which is unshakable and steady. And Dhruva's mother was Suniti, and she was married to the king Swayambhuva Manu. Anyway, we'll leave that side apart. But Dhruva was the son of the younger of Suniti, who was the queen. And of course, in those days, in order to ensure lineage, a king typically had more than one wife. In some ways, that was good. In other ways, it's problematic because, I don't know how it works. But if a person has one wife, then there's could be an element of jealousy. But if you have 2 or 3 wives, then maybe there's an increase in that component, or maybe they will get on together. I don't know. But in this case, he had a younger wife, and this younger wife had a son. Dhruva was the oldest son, but the younger wife influenced the king sufficiently for the king to be persuaded that her own son, is the favored one. And so the throne will pass to him. And anyway, love is blind, and so the king agrees. And then the wife, out of sheer jealousy, says, okay, now that that's secured, your original queen should be lodged at a distance, and her son with her. And if you promise me that, yeah. So he promises her that. So we have 2 things going on. One is jealousy, and the other is weakness on the other side. So driven by, the youth probably of the queen. And so it happens that Dhruva and his mother are living in the forest area, a beautiful scene, no doubt. But the area is also full of wild beasts and so on. And so it was in a humble cottage that they lived. And of course, it was charming in its own way. It was built of grey mud and thatched with brown palm leaves. I'm reading now from Sister Nivedita's account. And in front there was a deep veranda covered by the wide eaves, and here even a queen could rest and receive her village friends without a screen for facing it. Instead of the city was the impenetrable forest, whence at nightfall could be heard the roaring of wild beasts. And more as time goes on, the occasional visit of holy people on their way through the forest to distant shrines become the great events of their woodside life. And you can imagine what a beautiful impact it has on anybody living there, including the young Dhruva. Sister Nivedita says, "For the hush of the green woods brought with it healing, and the thought of God, and a great peace entered gradually into the heart of Suniti." So she goes on, thus under the calm influence, the child Dhruva would linger towards sunset near the lotus ponds, dreaming of the beauty of the great flowers that rocked to and fro with every movement of the waters, yielding, but untouched. How beautifully she writes. They came by degrees to mean for him all holiness, all tenderness, all purity, these large pink and white lotuses lying against their wide green leaves, as if the very gods had passed that way across the waters and left their blossoming in their footsteps. Or he would wake or lie awake at night and listen to the sobbing of the palm trees rustling and swaying in the darkness far above him, wondering and wondering what was the story they were telling. Or he would stand quietly watching the peasants in the rice fields that stretched to the horizon behind them, sowing the seed, and when the rains lay deep on the earth, transplanting the crops and so on. Anyway, years pass on like this, but by the age of 7, the young Dhruva is wondering, because he's told about the glory of his father, when can I visit my father? And can I go now, actually? Can I go and see him? He asks his mother this, and his mother is delighted. Why, yes, because there's no prohibition on them visiting. And so, full of startled pleasure at the thought, yet so accustomed to sorrow that she trembled at any change in the even tenor of their life, and of course she would miss her own son. So yes, you can go. In fact, tomorrow you can go. I'll give you an accompaniment and you can set out. Anyway, Dhruva goes through the beautiful scenery that is described, and when he comes to the palace, well, the king is overwhelmed with joy, because he had missed his son deeply, and not one day had gone by, all the 7 years, without his longing not only for his wife, but also for his son. And he was suddenly, the little one himself came of his own accord, and the king was moved by this. And so, full of love and trust, he felt as if he could never caress him enough or distinguish him enough to make up for those long years of neglect. Now, of course, at the moment where Dhruva is sitting on the king's knee, his stepmother enters the hall, and if only this lady had been the queen, her son would have had the right to be king some day, and she would not have needed to claim the succession for him. That's the way she was thinking. But as it was, she could never forget that her rival was Suniti, and that she was the real queen, and that Dhruva was the rightful heir to the throne. And so her heart was full of jealousy. This is the human tale. And so jealousy leads to anger, and in her anger, she just became extremely out of control, and she taunts her husband with the memory of his early promise that she would, send Dhruva away and send the queen away, and so on and so forth. And now she sees that the child is on his knee and the father is full of affection. And so in haste, the king puts the child down and turns to plead with her, and as if afraid that her evil prayers and speech might come to pass. And now imagine how the child feels. It doesn't take a modern psychologist to figure out that the child is feeling unwanted and immediately, and is confused straight away. First of all, there was caressing, and now the child is turned off the knee. And even a child of 7 will know about strength in man and woman, and that strength is the greatest thing in the whole world. And when his father puts him away, Dhruva feels as if his heart has broken within him, because he finds that his father is weak. And also the queen is weak, jealousy weakens. And so, silently, just almost unnoticed, the little boy touches the feet of his father, kisses the steps of the throne before him, and turns and beckons the guard who's accompanying him, let's go off again. And of course, it seems a long way home, but at last they reach the doorway, and the queen has been watching hour after hour, not able to rest in her terrible fear that something might have happened to her little boy. And anyway, the servant lifts the child down from the carriage, and the child bounds into her presence, and they have this wonderful, glad, joyful reunion. But something is different in the child, and Suniti notices this. And of course, she welcomes him with fruits and cakes and all kinds of treats. But the mother is watching anxiously. Something sad had come into the little child's little face, as if in that one short day the little child had grown much older. And of course, Suniti sighed, for she knew that all the happy years of his childhood were now behind them, and he would never be her little baby anymore. Anyway, when they finished the meal and song, Dhruva asks a very strange question. Mother, he says, is there anyone in the world who is stronger than my father? Oh, yes, my child, she answers, thinking of the Lord Krishna, and half shocked at Dhruva's ignorance. Oh, yes, my child, the lotus-eyed one is how Krishna is described, the one whose eyes are like lotus flowers. And the solemn little face grows all eagerness, and mother, where does he live? Says little Dhruva. Oh, far, far away, says his mother. And she answers very vaguely, not exactly, I don't know exactly the location, but maybe deep in the heart of the forest. And deep in the heart of the forest, the tiger lives there and the bear lives there, and they growl at night. You must have heard him. But there also dwells the lotus-eyed one, my son. And then Dhruva says a little bit more. The voice seemed to be sounding in his very heart. It was so loud that sometimes he wondered if his mother didn't hear it, because from far, far away, in the depths of the forest, it called to him, come to me, come to me. And he knew that it was the voice of this lotus-eyed one, in whom was all strength. And about midnight, he could hear it no longer, and he rose up from his little bed and stood over his sleeping mother for a moment, and she didn't wake up. Oh, lotus-eyed, I leave my mother just to go and find you, he said in his heart. And then he stole quietly and stood on the veranda looking at the forest. Now, how beautifully this is written, the description comes. It was the bright moonlight, and the trees cast long black shadows. He had never been allowed to go even a little way into the forest alone, and now he was going down to its very heart. But it must be right, for he could hear the voice calling, "Come to me, come to me." So this voice intensifies. We can pause there a little bit. You see, when we get a little disappointed in the world, it actually is an opportunity for us to turn to something better which exhibits all the strength. Because all of the human emotions which are negative are all in the category of weakness. And weakness is really the effect of ignorance. And so, how do we gain strength? We look to the highest ideal of strength we can find. And that is this, in this case, described as the lotus-eyed one. And then he goes into the forest barefoot with thorns, but it didn't worry him because he was intent on his search. And without resting, he was looking everywhere for this lotus-eyed one. At last, he reaches the heart of the forest, and then he sees fiery eyes and hot breath and a swinging tail. And Dhruva is only 7. He doesn't know who it is. And he goes up, "Are you the lotus-eyed one?" In pure ignorance, he asks. And the tiger, it was a tiger, slinks away, ashamed, because the tiger is strong. And the tiger slinks away. And next comes something with heavy footsteps and deep dark fur. "Are you the lotus-eyed?" says Dhruva. And the bear too slinks away ashamed. "No, I'm not the lotus-eyed one at all either." And still the child is hearing the voice of the lotus-eyed in his heart, saying, "Come, come." And he waits. And all at once, out of the darkness of the forest, there appears before him a holy person. And his name, of course, is Narada. And if you know anything about Indian mythology, you'll know always about Narada. Narada is something like a messenger of the Lord, a great devotee of Krishna. Anyway, he says, "Little one, you seek the lotus-eyed. Let me teach you the way by which you shall find him and where you shall find him." And then he showed him how to sit down on the earth without moving and to say over and over again, "O hail, blessed one, Lord of the worlds, hail." And he said that if his whole thought could fasten without wavering in perfect steadiness on the words he spoke, he would find the lotus-eyed without a doubt. And so the boy sank down on the ground as he was told and began to repeat the sacred text. Like a rock, he sat there, not moving a muscle. And even when the white ants came to build their anthill and raised it up around him, he never even stirred. For deep in his own heart, Dhruva had found the lotus-eyed, and he had come to rest forever. And so the end of this tale really is, so the pole star was given for his home, and is called to this day Dhruva Loka. But some say that way beyond it is another larger and just as true, and that there Dhruva's mother, Suniti, was placed, that her child might be always at her feet, and joy be hers throughout the countless ages of those stars. Now, the beauty of repeating these stories to children is to tell them, first of all, even at the age of 7, you can sit and meditate. And it is there that you'll find all the antidotes to what they're going to face, no doubt, in the future. So we often come across rejection, even though it's a simple child story. Many of us feel that we might be rejected by people, and some disappointment. And also, not only that, but disappointment in human nature as well. And so Dhruva found this. He saw human nature at its worst. even though the king was a king at the highest status with the palace and so on and so forth, still his weakness for being the slave of his younger wife is there. And then the weakness of this younger queen and her jealousy, and jealousy leading to anger and cruelty, lack of compassion. In contrast to that, we see the pure Suniti, the queen, living there in a pure environment, wonderful environment, living with a disappointment, no doubt, and also feeling rejected because the king was missing not only Suniti, but also more important or more significantly to him, his own son Dhruva. And naturally, when Dhruva came to him, he really feels, oh, this is wonderful. But then you see, instead of remaining steadfast in his authentic feelings, he succumbs to weakness again. Naturally, you ask, this is the greatest person I know of. All along for 7 years, I've been told how great my father is. But now, I experience for myself great disappointment that he's actually a very weak person. So is everybody like this? No. He's asking in his innocence. And his mother is saying, no, there's one who is the absolute embodiment of strength. And how beautifully she describes, he's the lotus-eyed one. Now he's looking, because if you look at a tiger's eyes, they're beautiful. There could easily be a lotus eyes. And certainly the bear exhibits a great deal of strength. Both these animals, tiger and bear, exhibit great strength. But you see how they slink away? No, in comparison to the one who authors our life. Oh. So it's a beautiful story, a beautiful story. And when children are told the story, then as they grow older, they go away from the literalism of the story and find out the inner meaning of it. And it's the same with all mythology. Many religions are blamed for the untruth of mythology. Let us say, for example, in the Abrahamic religions, we have Jonah and the whale. How is it possible for Jonah? Well, it's not even described as a whale, a big fish. How can Jonah sit in the jaws of the fish? Never seen that before. Is it feasible? And yes, well, it's not supposed to be, a literal thing. We have to understand what it means philosophically. And then many of the religious arguments go away. And the idea that this lotus-eyed is unseen outside, externally. It is there in the heart. And how do we discover it? We discover by sitting alone, taking advantage of the environment and stillness. So there he is saying, in that church, be still. Yeah, be still and know. And you can say, be still and know that you are God. It's a wonderful, beautiful statement. So that's the story of Dhruva. Now, we had a visiting monk from California. We had a beautiful time. And it was on Tuesday that I went to Glendalough. And of course, Glendalough is centered around St. Kevin. And I don't know if many people know about St. Kevin. So I was going to tell the children a little bit about St. Kevin. And I just printed some information out about him. Anyway, he was of the noble family. See, there's a theme going on here. And now I want you to correct my Irish. He was the son of Cuimloch. I don't know. I'm going to stick with my pronunciation then.
And, it sounds very good. So.
And Cuimel of Leinster. And he was born in it seems that they have the accurate birth in 498. So 1,500 years ago. And at the fort of the White Fountain, he was given the name of Quemgen, which means beautiful shining birth. And he also came into the world without the usual pains of labor, so the legends say. Anyway, an angel is said to have appeared as Kevin was about to be baptized and told his parents that the child should be called Kevin. And the priest, who they know is Father Ronan of Roscree, who performed the ceremony, said, "This was surely an angel of the Lord." And I think, Jean, you'll have to say this in Irish accent, or either Jean or Larry. "This was surely an angel of the Lord, and he named the child, so shall he be called." And so Kevin received the name, which in Latin means fair begotten, the one who is begotten and was fair. And he's the first. Yeah, go on.
Sorry, I don't know a lot about it, but I know the Irish for Kevin is Kevin, spelled Caomhin, something like that.
Okay, Kevin. Okay, Kevin. Yeah. Anyway, I think it means the one who is begotten fair, meaning not literally fair hair or anything necessarily, but one who was a bonny young boy, put it that way. So Kevin received the name and so on and so forth. And he's the first person in history to carry the name. It's also said that he was the fulfillment of the prophecy of St. Patrick, that he was the one to come who would evangelize the region of Ireland, just south of Dublin. Anyway, you'll recall that Dhruva was 7 when there was a transformative event. And so here too, from the age of 7, Kevin was educated by St. Patrick of Cornwall, and he lived with monks until he was 12. And he was called to the monastic life. He studied for the priesthood and was tutored by St. Owen, and I'm guessing here as well. His earliest tutor was St. Patrick of Cornwall, who had come to Leinster about 492. So we actually know quite a lot. And devoted himself with considerable ardor to the study of the sacred scriptures, in which his pupil also became proficient. Now, Kevin studied under his uncle, who was a saint, Saint Eugenius, and afterwards Saint Eugenius, I think, was Bishop of Ardstraw, who at the time lived in Kilmanagh in Wicklow, where he taught his pupils all the sacred learning, which he had acquired in the famous British monastery of Rosnut. I don't know. Anyway, he was duly ordained. I'm going to cut it short a little bit. And he lived as a hermit in a cave at Glendalough. A Bronze Age tomb, which is now known as St. Kevin's Bed, to which he was reportedly led by an angel. He went there, he went barefoot, wore skins, ate the nettles and herbs, and came to hand and spent his time in prayer. I'm very, very pleased he ate the nettles, because one of the most nutritious wild foods around here is the nettle. And yes, you put it in hot water, it takes the sting away, but it is the most nutritious thing in Ireland, actually. So we can see how beautiful the spot was that he chose, and he must have followed the river, or the little stream really, that comes out as a waterfall and develops into the upper lake, what is now called the upper lake and the lower lake. So he was looking for a hermit's life. And it was a lonely life. The branches and leaves of the tree sometimes sang sweet songs to him, says the poets, and heavenly music alleviated the severity of his life. And perhaps it was in this cave too that Kevin learned to play that harp of his that would long remain a treasured relic, I didn't know that there was a relic like that, St. Kevin's harp. And when he later writes his monastic rule, it was composed in verse, possibly he even set it to music on the harp. Now, he wanted to live a hermit's life, but his reputation obviously preceded him, and the local people around him possibly, and his reputation for saintliness spread. And we are told that he was blessed with good looks, and unconsciously he won the affections of a beautiful maiden named Kathleen, who is said to have had eyes of most unholy blue, is the description. In ignoring the fact that he was bound by holy vows, the bold Kathleen followed Kevin into the woods. When he felt her presence, he threw himself into a bed of nettles. He then gathered a handful of the burning weeds and skirted the maiden, says the legend anyway. And one biographer cites Kevin as saying, "The fire without extinguished the fire within." Anyway, I'll just read more of this information. There's all kinds of legends growing up and stories around St. Kevin. Now, one of the stories that I heard was that he had a special love for birds and animals. And that seems to be illustrated in many stories. The Actus Sanctorum, which is based on an ancient manuscript, contains a number of legends, and the author of a commentary on this manuscript, which is Father Francis Biet, S.J., explains, although many of the legends given to this work are of doubtful veracity, it was decided to let them stand in favor of the antiquity of the document, which is placed as having been written during or before the 12th century, a long time after Kevin. But you see, His Holiness would have spread by word of mouth. And long before his time in the cave, strange miracles were part and parcel of Kevin's life. For example, when he was an infant, a mysterious white cow came to his parents' house every morning and evening and supplied the milk for the baby. And when Kevin was old enough, he was put to tending sheep. And one day some men came to him and begged him to give them some sheep. He was touched by their poverty and gave them 4 sheep. And when evening came, however, and Kevin's sheep were counted, the correct number was still there. One day in autumn, Kevin was working in the kitchen and meals were being prepared for harvesters who were busy gathering crops in the fields when a number of pilgrims called and asked for food. And Kevin, filled with compassion, gave them the harvesters' dinner. He was rebuked by his superiors for his action, and he then told the attendants to fill all the ale jars with water and gather together all the bare meat bones. And then he prayed alone, and he said, water turned to ale, and the bones were covered with meat again. And so on. So there are a number of stories like this, which we won't necessarily go into. One of the most interesting legends, however, is about a pet goose which belonged to King O'Toole of Glendalough. And both the king and the goose were getting on in years, and as time passed, the goose became weak and unable to fly. And hearing of Kevin's sanctity and power, the king sent for him and asked that he make the beloved goose young. And Kevin asked for a payment of whatever land the goose would fly over. And as the goose could no longer take flight, O'Toole agreed. And when Kevin touched the bird, it grew young and flew over the entire valley that was used to found the monastery of Glendalough. And I think there was another page on this. Oh yes, here it is. Yes. But widely noticed, though he was, St. Kevin was always a hermit and a pilgrim at heart. He disliked being tied down, and even in his old age, he had a yearning to make just one more pilgrimage. However, when he mentioned his desire to a wise old man, the aged one replied, "Birds do not hatch their eggs when they are on the wing." Kevin took that as a sign from God that he should stay where he was. And as we know, around him grew this monastery. And the monasteries of those days it was more than just a monastery that we think of today. It was a center where there was a house for the abbot, and there was a church, which turned out really was a cathedral at that time when it was built. And then there was an enclosure. That was all an enclosure. And of course, you have this round tower. And this round tower was really there as a bell tower to call the monks to pray. And outside this central enclosure were small huts where monks lived. And each monk had a separate hut. And outside that was a community. A community that was dependent on the monastery, as the monastery was on the community, where they grew beans and had livestock there and so on, agriculture, and a mill that manufactured grain. So there was a whole community that was built up. Now, as we know in Glendalough, of a history from Vikings and so on onwards, up until probably the 17th century, the whole place was ravaged by invaders and what have you. And that is why it's basically in ruins. But any visitor we bring here, we always take to Glendalough because it is a tangibly holy place. Imagine somebody now wanting to go and be silent and know God through meditation and sleeping in a cave, and we know how cold the winters can get, in an isolated valley, and bathing in the waters. And I think it's said that birds perched on his head. He was extremely fond of animals. And then, of course, all his desire to be alone and for solitude is all disrupted. And so he then succumbs to divine will and forms a community. So that's the remarkable life of Saint Kevin. Good. Well, I don't know if there are any comments or any questions from there on.
It was very interesting, Swamiji. Thank you.
Swamiji, one question in regards to these historical epics. What is the date that you put on Rama? So I know that you kind of circumvent this issue. You always say that the story was written sometime around 7,000 years ago. But if you say that this is a historical event and it's supposed to have happened in the Treta Yuga, which is millions of years before, so how do you reconcile those dates?
I don't. I leave that to the other people to argue because I don't consider it extremely important. So whether it was in the Treta Yuga or whether it was in 7,000 years ago or so on, people are divided on this. It was a heck of a long time ago. That's all I know.
Okay, Swamiji. Thank you.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Swami.
Thank you, Swami, very much.
Okay. You see, it's easy to get bogged down in these historical issues, but these are just supplementary, superficial. All you can say is some people say this and some people say that, and you make your own mind up really from there. Also, you see around all these, one thing we actually do know, because it is a historical account, is that the two epics, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, were significant events. They were so significant that they stood out in people's memories. And I'm not saying it was written down anywhere. You see, it was probably handed down by word of mouth. And being handed down by word of mouth, we get many additions and embellishments to the story, because the story is portrayed in drama, in poetry, and in dancing, and various cultural expressions will be there. So, we have to bear in mind. But the kernel of the story, the essence of the story, really would be the same thing. The same thing with the Iliad and the Odyssey. See, we don't know the actual historical facts, but there's definitely a core of historicity around it, around which everything else grows and develops. And the important thing is, what is the teaching? What does it tell us? Does it tell us something significant? All right. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Swamiji.